The whips have agreed that paragraph 8 of report number 1, dealing with the shared arrangements with Richmond, will be considered next. I now move reception of that report and paragraph 8. Can the Council note any alterations to page 23 of the agenda to delete the reference to no request being made by the opposition for representation on the member advisory group? An amendment to the recommendation in paragraph 8 has been circulated. Can I ask Councillor Osborne and Councillor Carpenter to now move and second the amendment?
I move it formally, please, Madam Mayor.
And formally seconded.
Thank you. Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. May I congratulate you on your election to the mayoralty and wish you a very successful and enjoyable
You certainly may. It's items for decision which you've moved. Which I've moved.
Are we okay?
Yep. We're okay.
We'll continue. Madam Mayor, in our amendment to the motion, we make it clear that this side of the House is committed to making efficiencies in the delivery of services to Wandsworth residents. The proposals put forward by the majority party for joint staffing with Richmond are, over time, forecast to deliver some 10 million per annum of savings. The first instalment, in paper 15252, delivers some 1 million of these, but not until 2017-18. However, the medium-term financial strategy in paper 15263 shows that we need to generate savings of 32 million in 2016-17 alone. It is therefore clear that the proposed shared staffing arrangement with Richmond represents only a small contribution to the financial task ahead for Wandsworth Council. Our concern with the proposed shared staffing arrangements with Richmond is that it locks us into an inflexible partnership with an authority with very different demographic characteristics to Wandsworth, making it a not immediately obvious partner. We note that Kingston, which shares many demographic characteristics with Richmond's, carefully considered a similar arrangement over a lengthy period, but ultimately decided that the disadvantages outweighed the advantages. If shared staffing with Richmond is not a good deal for Kingston, why is it such a good deal for Wandsworth? We think that the shared staffing arrangement is not the best model. If we marry in haste, we may repent at leisure. We prefer the shared services model. If there are services that we can beneficially jointly deliver with Richmond, then we should do so, but we should not be restricted to Richmond. Education and housing are effectively excluded from the shared staffing arrangement. How are we going to deliver savings there? Why are we not looking at other neighbouring authorities that we could beneficially work with to jointly deliver these services? Richmond is roughly half the size of Wandsworth, and while I can see that there are significant scale economies to Richmond in joining with Wandsworth to effectively triple the size of their authority, the scale economies to Wandsworth are proportionately less. We need to look beyond Richmond for the greater economies of scale we need. There are other ways of generating efficiencies. Wandsworth has a considerable property estate. Better management of that estate could generate considerable revenue. Wandsworth also has some 500 million of cash reserves. More intelligent investment of those reserves could generate considerably more interest income than we are currently receiving. We also believe that there is further scope for making economies through joint procurement with other local authorities. While Wandsworth's senior management is tied up with implementing the joint staffing arrangement with Richmond, it is not going to be able to explore these other avenues which we believe could collectively deliver far greater benefits than the proposed shared staffing arrangement with Richmond. We think it is a big mistake to rush forward with these plans before they've been properly considered. Joint staffing has major implications, not least for staff pensions. The Pensions Committee will not even meet to consider these before September. we need to hit the pause button so that all the implications are properly assessed before rushing like lemmings to implement this joint staffing arrangement. The leader would do well to heed the French military maxim, reculer pour mieux sauter, or go back for a better leap. Finally, if we are to be successful in implementing major structural changes, we need to do it on a cross-party basis. We need agreement from the political parties, the staff and the residents involved. We get that by discussion, not diktat. Last month, I was in Austin, Texas, at the LBJ Library. Lyndon Johnson took forward President Kennedy's Great Society into legislation by bipartisan agreement. As a result, great social changes like Medicare and Medicaid, the US version of the NHS, still stand today, some 50 years later. Councillor of India, I know you'll know Lyndon Johnson, but if you're really committed to making long-term success of any arrangement with Richmond, you need to get the staff, the opposition, and most importantly, the residents of Wandsworth on board. You and your colleagues appear to be making little effort to do this. If you're not careful, you will go down in history not as a Lyndon Johnson, but as a President Ford.
Madam Mayor, I think I'm entitled to one of those kind of points of personal explanation I normally don't rise to. But only recently I was reminded by somebody that they occasionally advised Councillor Carpenter on his speeches, and they said, maybe not that one. And I think this is the occasion, maybe not that one.
Councillor Senior.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will try to keep my comments relatively brief, as I may be saying rather a lot about Heathrow later on. But in response to Councillor Carpenter's comments, I too have been to the LBJ Library within the last few months. And it has to be said, it's very clear from that library, and indeed from going to the Texas White House down the road, that LBJ hardly led a united country at the time. And it is also very clear from that some of the social programmes he brought in at the time are now costing 100 times more than was originally anticipated. So perhaps they could have thought a little bit more about some of those programmes at the time. Now, just dealing with some of the specific points that Councillor Carpenter made, because they are important points, and I want to respond to them before moving more generally onto the issue. Councillor Carpenter mentioned the pensions fund, a very important point. The key point is the two pension funds of the councils will not be merging. Absolutely vital, though the Richmond Pension Fund is in fairly good shape, they will be remaining separate. Councillor Carpenter also mentioned the need to manage our property in a different way. Well, in fact, we're already doing that. And as has been made clear in recent reports to the OSC, we are continuing to manage our property in a way that actually brings in income. In some cases by managing disposals, whereby we keep a leasehold interest. In other cases by actually buying new properties to bring in income from the council. And we have also changed our cash management process. Of course, it's on the agenda later tonight. I know Councillor Carpenter would want us to be considerably more adventurous in our handling of the cash than we are at the moment. We have made some moves towards that already, and rightly so, and perhaps we can do so further. But however adventurous we were, we will still have major problems with the reductions in the council's finances. And of course, as Councillor Carpenter said, merging with the shared services Richmond is only a contribution, but it will be an important contribution, and the figures given are probably only a start rather than an end to the process. But if I could just mention a few general points about the shared services arrangements. The Labour Party seem to think there is a perfect partner for us out there somewhere, a borough that is exactly like us. It's as if you can go to a party and find your perfect partner there in one evening. That doesn't even happen in a Hugh Grant rom-com these days. But there are and if anyone thinks that Merton is the same as Wandsworth, well, they haven't done as much canvassing in Merton as I've done in Merton, as many of us have done in Merton over the past few years. But there are a few things which I think are worth pointing out. The first one is geography. And yes, I do think it's important that the boroughs are contiguous and it's easy to get between the town halls so that officers don't spend their time, we don't spend all of our time on endless train journeys. Secondly, let us be clear, because counties are different doesn't mean they can't work together. If we look at the tri-borough, the three boroughs comprising that arrangement, which is really 2+1, all operate housing in a different way. That doesn't mean that not being able to save money by providing shared services in different areas. Now, if you look at the size of it, some reference was made quite rightly to the relative sizes of the authorities. If you were to put these two authorities together with a shared staffing arrangement, separate authorities but shared staffing, you've got a population of roughly about 500,000 people in total, which is generally thought of as being pretty much a good fit for getting the best value out of contracts and other services, maintaining efficiencies whilst being close enough to the ground to understand what's going on. And finally, and most importantly, it is an issue, I think, of culture. The cultures in Richmond and here are different, there's no doubt about that, but they are also very complementary. And they're complementary in one thing from all the discussions I've had with Richmond officers and with Richmond councillors over the past few months, and that is that they want value for money and they want high-quality services for the people of their borough, as we do for our borough as well. And I feel quite happy, and what I've seen so far, this proposal is a sensible and effective way forward.
Councillor Ambash.
Madam Mayor and fellow councillors, if the majority party wants this great change to last over time, they should seek cross-party support. This proposed major change will be costly to deliver over the next 2 years and therefore should only be undertaken if it has lasting and wide-ranging support. But there is no electoral mandate for merging staff with Richmond. This proposal was not included in any of the 2014 local election manifestos. The majority party may have been in power for over 4 decades, but they should not take the electorate for granted. Do you want to spend 2 years restructuring and joining with Richmond with the chance of this unravelling after the 2018 local elections? If you think this could never happen, just think again. The Conservatives lost a Richmond Council by-election just last Thursday. Also, the inadequate consultation, which has been half delivered on these proposals, do not confirm that there is widespread support for residents for this proposal in Wandsworth. So other than saving money, there's no clear aim or objective for the shared staffing structure given by the majority party, except a shared political ideology, though that's not an objective for delivery of council services. What is the raison d'etre, one asks? Without this, we cannot measure success or otherwise measure this project. We from this side think there is merit in shared arrangements with other boroughs, both in improving quality of services and reducing costs. But the choice of fit with a partner should consider whether there are similar needs in the community and aims of the councils, as this would give a better chance of success. Outer London, suburban Richmond, dominated by an older person's population, is an unlikely fit with the predominantly younger population of inner London Wandsworth. As well as differing needs, there are currently very different approaches to providing services by the two boroughs. Wandsworth has retained its social housing, and Richmond is not a direct provider of housing. Wandsworth has established a quite effective joint working with the Wandsworth Clinical Commissioning Group to tackle health inequalities in the borough and develop a strong out-of-hospital strategy. Richmond approach is less well developed. Wandsworth has retained its education and children's statutory services, while Richmond has formed a partnership with Kingston to outsource these responsibilities, and yet Kingston spurned the chance to join in the shared staffing arrangements. So finding common community needs of residents and a similar approach for the council should be paramount in the decision of who to partner with, not political ideology. Further, there are huge major changes outlined in the report 15252, and these have not been properly assessed and appraised. To name a few, do we really want to share IT with Richmond? Do we really want to get rid of the borough solicitor's post? He or she has a particular legal role as the proper officer or monitoring officer to make sure we all act legally and correctly. Do we really want to restructure our departments yet again? Do we really want 2 years of uncertainty for our staff? And do we really want our staff to have 2 different employers at the same time? Much of these important details, including the costs of potential benefits, have not been addressed or appraised fully in paper 15252. So in conclusion, I urge members opposite not to rush into this marriage of convenience. These are huge decisions which could lead to a costly and tearful divorce. If you are not convinced of the detail, then please vote for the amendment for further work to be done to build a better and stronger approach. A stronger proposal with wider support is likely to be more enduring. Thank you.
Councillor Hampton.
Madam Mayor, I run a business in Wandsworth and we are endlessly searching for better provision of services at better cost. Conservative big government has encouraged not only saving money, but best practice and to avoid duplication. I've been very proud to sit on FGROS. I have respect for opposition council colleagues, particularly Councillor Carpenter and his huge wealth of business experience. So how very, very sad was I last week that they abstained on this very important collaborative working. Councillor Daly, you look at me, you said, I quote, we were being short-sighted. Well, I'm really sorry, but I think all of you are being short-sighted. In any merger, Councillor O'Brien works for mergers and acquisitions, you will have a very small number of people at executive level who do the detail. You cannot possibly have all the interested parties. It won't work. Over the last week, I've done an enormous amount of research into this. I've read the papers. I've also spoken to Professor Tony Travers, who was part of, with Lord Adonis, reviewing the panel for the Tri-Borough. I want to look at the facts. There are certain things that keep coming out. These are that it is very rare to go into an agreement where you don't have a neighbour. So effectively, we're talking about Lambeth, Merton and Richmond. The second thing is that so much of the savings will, of course, be for senior staffing, very expensive members of staff. And not surprisingly, the arrangements work incredibly well when somebody is standing down. Richmond, we have a chief executive who is going. In Wandsworth, Mr. Buss will be going. It's natural, it's logical. You may also, maybe not be pleased to hear, but in all the extensive research work, residents very rarely have an opinion. They are neutral at best, and dare I say, as long as their front-end services are right, they don't really mind what is done behind the scenes. But overwhelmingly, and this is what Tony Travers kept telling me, it's about trust and what fits with your borough. Wandsworth and Lambeth have a totally different dynamic. Merton, I know something about Merton. I was a PPC there some time ago. The Labour incumbent is still there, but I talk to an awful lot of people. Well, I will point out St Helier. So you think we should go into St Helier and Sutton. It's divided area, it's much better. Councillor Alan Brittus, yes. He rather maxed out on the old comms, didn't he? Endless posters saying what a clever chap he was to freeze council tax. Wasn't that Eric Pickles? Oh yes, he's a Conservative. You talk about, this has been very carefully considered, and I was saddened again about the point about procurement. We're already dealing with procurement, but maybe the opposition are muddling up with commissioning, because of course commissioning of housing and education is totally different. We are all going to keep our sovereignty, we will have the flexibility. And just to finish on, it's a bit like dating, isn't it? We've been introduced, we've got to know each other very well. We're now engaged. And I would ask the opposition, genuinely ask the opposition, you're not the bride and groom, and sadly you're not even any of the ushers. But please, come to the wedding and let's make it a happy marriage.
Councillor Critchard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to focus on the consultation with residents over this proposed, the proposed shared services. Section 3.2 of the Local Government Act 1999, I paraphrase, says that a local authority must consult tax and ratepayers, service users, other representatives when deciding on how to fulfil its duty. Unfortunately, this Act doesn't give guidance on what a reasonable consultation looks like. So how did Wandsworth consult its residents? They added an online questionnaire to the website and mentioned the proposals in a March issue of Brightside. I have a copy here. No mention of this important proposal on the front cover. The Thames Bridge finalists are considered more interesting. The proposals merit half a page on page 7, and half of that is taken up with a picture of Councillor Govindia. And then in order to comment, a reader needs to go to the website or order a paper copy of the questionnaire. And by the June 2012 edition of, June 2015 edition of Brightside, this one, no mention at all. So I guess Wandsworth clearly think that a quarter of a page in one magazine means they've told residents enough. Let's look at the results of the survey. Reading para 8 of the council papers, you'd think that Wandsworth residents were rushing into the streets clamouring to join Richmond, an overwhelming 86% in favour. Hang on, who's read the Appendix 1 to paper 1552? Fewer than 360 questionnaires came back. 360 people is 0.1% of the borough's population. It's true that 86% of those who replied, the 355, agreed with the statement that the council should look at different ways of managing services. But that's a very open question and very motherhood and apple pie. Just over 150 respondents were actually in favour of the specific proposal, 1/20% of our residents. Para 8 is at best misleading and at worst a barefaced lie. You should be ashamed to publish such nonsense in public council papers. I guess that Wandsworth residents don't understand what's being proposed. The majority party says that no one is interested in reorganisations, which is exactly what Councillor Govindia said, and because of that, they haven't tried. Because of that, they have not tried to engage the residents in their proposals. This is the nanny state in action. We know
Councillor
what's good for
Critchard, are you accepting
We'll
the
make
intervention
all
or
the
not?
decisions. I do not accept an intervention. Right, okay. The leader's response from question 2 shows how the council can twist a failure to engage by saying only those against will say something. We'll see what happens when the survey results come through. And Councillor Dawson's reply about we don't do any surveying because it costs too much. Really, how short-sighted. This is all totally unsatisfactory. The 1998 Act tells us we have a duty to explain major changes to our residents, service users and voters. A council committed to
Madam
engaging
Mayor, a point of
its
personal
residents should
explanation.
have
I think
done
she's
so
misrepresenting
much more.
what I actually said to the
Were
leader,
there any public
and that
meetings?
in fact...
No. Was the questionnaire included in Brightside for free post return? No. Have there been any follow-up articles in Brightside? No.
Councillor Critchard, can you just wait for just one moment, please? Just one moment. Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a point of personal explanation. I didn't say we shouldn't do any consultation. I just said we should keep it in balance and be conscious of the costs.
Thank you. Would you like to continue?
Right, OK. Have there been any follow-up articles in Brightside? No. Is there a link on the council website about the updates? No. Is there any evidence that there's been dialogue with any specific groups? No. Shows the majority party is uninterested in involving local residents and service users. And I'm sure that people who drafted the Act would have expected a better effort at involvement. Are Wandsworth humble enough to say, we are disappointed with the results and we will do more? No. This level of involvement and response will not be good enough for a consultation going to planning. It's not good enough for a 20-mile-an-hour limit implementation. Wandsworth itself asked for a 30% response. I know the majority party will say this is a consultation, not a referendum. But what's been done so far has reached a tiny minority of the people in the borough, and it affects everyone. I say that Wandsworth has failed in its statutory obligation to consult properly on the proposals, and therefore urge you to vote in favour of Part V of the amendment and instruct officers to carry out more extensive public consultations before bringing proposals for shared staffing arrangements with Richmond to the Council. Thank you.
Councillor Peterkin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm always slightly in awe of Councillor Critchard's zeal for dialogue and consultation, and I feel that if we can somehow switch her for the Prime Minister of Greece over the next 24 hours, we might be able to keep Greece in the Eurozone. But I can just see it now, those signs we've seen on every door as we tramp round the borough in the run-up to the election. No door-to-door sales, no canvassers, and absolutely no one wanted to consult further on paragraph 59 of paper 15252. Other than that, I can assure members this is going to be a short speech, as the motion itself really offers little that's substantive. I came into the debate, and indeed the meeting as a whole tonight, hoping to be enlightened. I hope that I would finally find out what the real grounds for Labour's opposition to these excellent proposals actually are. Imagine my disappointment then on Tuesday evening to receive an amendment which is, even by their standards, a model of obstructionism and opportunism. Head A of the motion really gives the game away. The opposition have no principled objection to these proposals, so they offer a series of process-driven whinges. Their complaints, such as they are, I think are threefold. Firstly, that we've not explored the full range of potential partners. Madam Mayor, given that Wandsworth is only contiguous with 7 other boroughs, of whom 3 are apparently currently in the process of breaking up the tri-borough, one of which has decided that shared staffing with Richmond is not for them at this time, and 2 of whom are synonymous with high tax, rampant waste, poor services and low resident satisfaction, and no prizes for guessing which party runs those, not really cultural fits with Wandsworth. It's unclear exactly who they have in mind. They've certainly not managed to credibly advance any case that any such offer is or would be available. My suspicion is what they're really unhappy about is that the arrangement is not with a Labour borough. I'm afraid that if they want to have executive power in Wandsworth, it's going to have to be obtained by dint of their own efforts and not by proxy. The second is that there's been insufficient consultation, and we just heard 5 minutes on that. As the paper makes clear, the consultation already carried out featured prominently on the Council's website for 2 solid months, was sent out to every recipient of the Council's e-newsletter, and was carried in the March edition of Brightside. There will be further consultations on the issue as we move forward and as the arrangements evolve. We often hear from the opposition, and from Councillor Critchard in particular, on this measure or that they don't feel that there's been sufficient consultation. Strangely enough, we rarely hear from them, and in fact Councillor Critchard took the first tentative steps in that direction perhaps in her speech a moment ago. We don't really hear from them what they think might be sufficient. They're always trying to set us an ever higher bar. There comes a point, Madam Mayor, that our residents expect us to do the job that they sent us here for, to implement means by which quality services can be delivered at value for the taxpayer. There's a reason it's called the executive and not the consultative. Councillor Carpenter gave us a French military maxim earlier. Let me give him another one, although one that came from a famous Prussian: toujours l'audace. Madam Mayor, reasonable consultation is an important tool for public engagement in that process. As they have on other matters recently, I'm afraid the opposition simply wish to use it as an instrument of unwarranted delay, which they use to mask the fact that they've no credible, principled opposition to these proposals. Thirdly, Madam Mayor, they set out 3 ways in the motion in which Wandsworth organises its services a little differently to Richmond, and claim that these are in some way insurmountable obstacles. There is work to do to ensure that we realise the savings that we want from this arrangement. That is quite right. However, the approach of the opposition appears to be that we ought to simply give up before we begin, rather than attempt that work. And I think they'll find the majority of a completely different cast of mind. Madam Mayor, I suspect paragraph F of the motion actually comes closest to explaining their opposition to the proposals, namely that they've been advanced, developed, and are now being implemented by the majority and not by themselves. They have not to date demonstrated that they have anything particularly useful to add, and that's an impression that Councillor Osborne's odd appearance at last week's Finance Committee, at which he launched into a 5-minute diatribe on nothing very much, advancing no principal argument, but he made clear that he intends to play this entire process for all the political advantage he can get. Madam Mayor, these proposals go a good deal of the way to securing the Council's financial future, as the government continues its work of repairing the damage that the party opposite did to the public finances during their last ill-fated period in power. And their opposition to this proposal stem from nothing more than the fact that we're proposing them, and it's only reinforced by the amendment. Councillor, it's a full council meeting, not impresario comedy night. I call upon the council to oppose the amendment and support the substantive motion.
Councillor Peachkin, your 5 minutes is up. Thank you. Councillor Grimston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I can say, first of all, I don't oppose the concept of shared services. I have seen a number of examples out there where shared services involving complete mergers of top management teams work effectively. I've seen others where they don't work so effectively. But I nonetheless am getting, I think, increasingly concerned about this tension between the unprecedented speed at which the process is going, which I agree, it is going at an unprecedented speed, and yet the claim at the same time that no stone is being left unturned here, because I'm afraid I don't believe that those two aims are actually compatible with each other. My views on consultation, I think, are fairly well known. I don't think consultation is the same as referendum. I think councils have a right to take decisions. That's why we elect governments. Of course, the majority party has a mandate to carry out this sort of thing if it thinks it's in the best interest. Nonetheless, I do have to say that one of the difficulties with the consultation is that it hasn't been about what the implications are on the ground for our services. There is, I think, a myth at the moment, and I think as members we need to really get to terms with the fact that it is a myth, that we can make enormous reductions in backroom services without having any effect whatsoever on the front line. Those of us who have been very active in our wards recently, and that will be every member of this council, I would imagine, cannot avoid the fact that actually things are taking an awful lot longer. There are areas of what the council is doing at the moment where I know for a certainty that the officers are working as hard as they ever have, but nonetheless the chopping back is meaning that we're not meeting some of our targets around planning at the moment, that it is taking an awful long time, 6, 8, 10 months, to get a relatively straightforward change to our roads or parking systems, because there just aren't the officers there to carry it out. And one of the problems that we haven't been able to tell our residents what the implications of some of this are, and to engage them in the process of consultation and discussion about how we could go forward, is that I don't think we understand those issues ourselves as members. And I think we need to understand those as members, as to how, having just gone through one massive reorganisation here of reducing from 6 to 2 departments, we're now straight away going to another where we increase back up to 5 departments. And the enormous potential reputational risk that there is to this council of officers who have just got used to one set of changes, where we have lost a vast amount of the organisational memory and organisational knowledge of this council, now having to go back into another where in effect they have to get to know a whole new geographical area, a whole new political culture, and 2 very, very different areas. And where I do have real concerns about whether Richmond is the right partner is, of course, Councillor Senior is absolutely right. No councils are exactly the same. But it will be difficult to find much of a bigger contrast between Richmond, the most wealthy local authority in the country, and Wandsworth, which, despite our wealth in some areas, is nonetheless an inner London borough. And the fact that most of the big ticket items are just not there, the ones where real savings could be made, are not there because the 2 councils don't do them in the same way or don't do them at all. And I do have to say, at some point, the claim in the main papers that each council will save £10 million of itself really ought to be getting questions going. Because that's what we're told, 10 million savings for Wandsworth, about the same for Richmond, or whatever the wording was. And yet, we know that Wandsworth is double the size of Richmond. We've just seen in the changes we're talking about today, 1 million savings for Wandsworth, 500,000 for Richmond. It cannot be the case that they're both going to save 10 million. That's the point where, with members, we really should be seeing the alarm bells ringing. We really should be saying, what are these figures? What are they based on? Because I've looked at the figures around some district councils out there. There are some extraordinary examples. There are examples like Vale of Whitehorse and South Oxfordshire, which seems to be saving around 5 million a year from its sharing of services, despite the fact these are organisations with budgets of tens of millions, not around 1.3 billion, as our two authorities do together. We really ought to be going out there, slowing the process and finding out the experience of members out there and of other organisations that have been through this. Because I come back and say, if we really do rush this through at a speed where an awful lot of stones are unturned at the moment, because we have this pride that we're not the sort of council that discusses the implications of what we do, we just go out and do it. Well, with something this important, I really don't think that's going to deliver the right right result. And I do say to the majority party, let's slow this down, let's take it at a little bit of an easier pace, let's find out what's going on out there, because to get this wrong will be a massive lost opportunity which we've grew for many years.
Councillor Osborne.
Yes, at the heart of this process, we must all, I'm sure, agree in this council chamber that the point is we have a duty as a council to provide excellent service to our residents at appropriate cost, as has been said a couple of times in this debate this evening. But we do it in a context. We do it in the context of ongoing and relentless demands from national government on local government to cut costs and make savings of tens of millions of pounds every year. And there is absolutely no back to this. It is going to happen for the foreseeable future. So what do we do as a borough to try and deal with this situation? Now, one of the ways forward is indeed to look at shared arrangements with other boroughs. But there are question marks over some of the things we are setting out to do, especially based on what other boroughs have already done. We should be trying to learn lessons from what has happened before. If you join up your chief executive, let's make sure we do not make the mistakes that Thurrock and Barking and Dagenham made. If you're going to bring boroughs together and get an arrangement similar to that in the tri-boroughs, then let's make sure that we look at that commission that was put together to examine the nature of that arrangement. And recommended to Hammersmith and Fulham that they stay in the arrangement, but they repatriate their chief executive. That commission, by the way, was Lord Adonis, Tony Travers, and I think she deserves a mention as well, Deborah Lincoln, Senior Vice President Communications from Warner Brothers United Kingdom. And the point of all this is we are not only doing this on a precipitate basis, but we are not, crucially, we are not taking everybody with us. And as we have said, there are three key groups that should be taken with us in this process in order to get it right, before we commit ourselves to something which might go wrong. Might go right, it might go wrong. And the three constituent parts that must be included that are not being included properly, first of all, the residents of this borough, they're not being consulted properly, and we've outlined our concerns about that. I made the point at the Finance and Corporate Resources Committee categorically that I do not believe the staff in this borough are being properly brought into the process, and that there are great anxieties on the staff side. Just note straight away that they have formed the impression that they had a contractual agreement dating from the spring, including various elements such as pay protection. It was supposed to come into effect in the autumn, and they now believe that it is called into question by the arrangements with Richmond. Now, if you've got a situation like that, you are not taking the staff with you on this process. And as we have said already this evening, the third component part, I would humbly suggest, ought to be the opposition in this council. So three key elements that should be brought in and are not being brought in. There is no perfect partner, that is correct. That is why we have said from the start There should be a spread of relationships, and we have a spread of relationships. It's a matter of strengthening them and improving upon them with various local authorities, not just one. The comparison has been made with a wedding, but that's not right. This isn't a wedding with one local authority. We should have several relationships. This is about our children. The party is not a wedding, the party is a christening. And the King and Queen, mother and father of Sleeping Beauty, made a terrible mistake at the christening party. They forgot to invite the bad witch. The bad witch put a curse. The bad witch put a curse on the child. But luckily, it all turned out okay because they had invited 3 good witches to the party. Let's call the good witches residents, staff and opposition. They could have got it worse. They could have forgotten to invite the 3 good witches and simply invited Maleficent, the bad witch. And then it would have gone much worse for them. And that is what Wandsworth Council is doing. It's inviting 1 bad witch and not the 3 good witches to the christening party. But don't worry, let me make an announcement tonight. If this amendment does not go through, we'll make sure there's a party for everybody, because we will put together a review body that looks at all of this and brings all groups together to make sure this is properly examined. Thank you very much.
Councillor Govindia.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It sort of sounds like a bit like Listen with Mother. And one of those things about Listen with Mother is that no mother thinks that the man their daughter is going out with is good enough for them. And so that's what we're being told, that, you know, that the man you're going out with is not good enough for you. I think the party opposite has been wrong-footed from the very beginning of this announcement that Wandsworth and Richmond were going to find a way of working together to save £10 million each and perhaps more. I think they were wrong-footed because they thought that this is a kind of a long-standing discussion in our group and various snippets will come out and they will get a flavor of everything that was going before the announcement was made. And in fact, nothing like that happened. So we had long discussion in the group and everything remained, the element of surprise wasn't spoiled for them or us. I think they've been sort of worried that the one reason why we worked with Richmond is because of its politics, but they failed to understand that it is about working out with somebody who is around. I mean, it's no point in asking that you want to go to dance with somebody who's actually not at the ball. It's a bit difficult to do that. Earlier today, I looked at the Independent Commission on Wandsworth Council budgeting, which many of you had received during the election. And the report said that Wandsworth is insular, that my predecessor and I were dismissive of working with other boroughs, and the authors thought that Tories would never do this kind of stuff, so the opposition should do it. So the recommendation was that an incoming administration should actively pursue opportunities for shared services or joint management of services with other local authorities, the NHS, and other public bodies as partners in order to improve value for money without jeopardizing frontline service delivery. So what happens? They lose the election, we win the election, the incoming administration does exactly that, and they find that that's not something that they would want to do now, because in fact they're doing it with somebody else. It is not what we're doing that they're objecting to, it is who are we doing it with. And that seems to be the sum total of their argument. And, you know, they've been talked about parties and not being invited to parties. You know, that's a bit light-hearted. But actually, if you want to come to the hottest ticket in town, just talk to me and I'll get you a pre-dinner drinks invitation. I'm sure you can get there. But let's examine the amendment. The amendment talks about exactly what we're doing. So it sort of talks about, you know, we should do the same as what we're doing. So I don't know what that is, the beef is. On a day when there's been perhaps one of the most radical in reforming budgets, perhaps we should remind ourselves why we are in the mess we are and who is to blame for it. And perhaps that's a kind of moment to reflect that all this may not have been necessary if somebody had behaved a few years ago and not sort of let the roof go to ruin whilst the sun was shining. I accept the points that are made on consultation, but I take the view that one of the things that we have said consistently and for which the residents of this borough have consistently voted us in is that we will deliver for you the best services for the keenest price. And we will find and explore every opportunity. And they have trusted us for 35 years and more. And this is indeed an example of looking for that keenest price and finding the best opportunity. The amendment talks about the senior officers. Well, lawyers would call that kind of reference as innuendo. Senior officers are making a proper analysis of where there are synergies and where there are none. And where there are none, they are finding ways of how we can get around it. And I think that is the right way of doing it, and they have an honest approach to it. So I don't think that should be a bar. And then, of course, the rest of the amendments, limbs in the amendments are all about talk, and more talk, and so on. But the fundamental thing I was taught when I first got on the council is that if you're going to look for savings, you need to find them as early as possible in a cycle so that they're actually worth more. So there's no point in sitting around talking an awful long time, because that 10 million will not be 10 million by the time you have finished talking. I just turn to the point that Councillor Osborne made about, a commission. I know everyone has gone over time, actually, today, and in fact the Mayor has been quite indulgent. It's the first evening. So I was just going to respond to Councillor Osborne.
You're just coming up to your 5 minutes now.
Thank you very much. Talked about sort of spread of relationships, and answer to question 1's talked about the spread of relationships we have. And we are indeed going to grow those if there are opportunities, and those will remain. So it will not be a party of 2, it will be a party of many. Councillor Grimston talked about 10 million
Councillor
each.
Govindia, can I ask you to wind up?
Just finish that, in fact, the officers have examined each authority and found there is scope. And the reason why there is scope is, on Richmond's side, is because they haven't been as rigorous with the budgets as we have. And despite our being big, our rigor has been so relentless that the money is smaller. But that's the answer. Madam Mayor, this is not an amendment worthy of support.
The matter now before the Council is the amendment proposed by Councillor Osborne and seconded by Councillor Carpenter concerning the shared staffing arrangements with Richmond Council. Please indicate with a show of hands those for the amendment. And those against the amendment. And any abstaining? The result for the voting is as follows: for 20 and against 30. The motion has been lost. The motion now before the Council is the set of recommendations in paragraph 8 of Report 1, page 24 of the agenda, concerning shared staffing arrangements with Richmond Council. Please indicate by show of hands those for the amendment.
For the motion.
I've got amendment here.
No, those for the motion should be.
Okay. Apologies. Those for the motion. And those against the motion? And any abstaining?
That's carried 30-20.
The result of the voting as follows: 34 and 20 against. The motion is carried.